Mic check. Mic check.
Hello.
Thank you for coming to our panel today. I think it's going to be very interesting. We're going to give the bear and bull cases for blobs, I think, on Ethereum. And as you can see, the title is Are Blobs Good for Ethereum? This has been a huge topic of discussion within the community for a while now because no one really has the answer. I think this is an open question, and that's why we have this panel. So I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have Brad, Tim, and Ansgar. They all work on different things within the ecosystem, but I'd let them introduce themselves. So we'll start with Brad.
Yeah, hey everyone. I am OX Bread Guy, former KOL. Now I'm part of the Mega ETH team. I just got nerd sniped, honestly, by blobs specifically and just the value accrual method within, or mechanisms within the modular ecosystem. So a lot of long form posts. That's actually how I met Tim. That's actually how I met Anthony. I just talked about it a lot. Maybe some of you guys have seen some of my research stuff. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Tim Robinson. I'm the head of research at Blue Yard Capital. And I recently created the Ethereum blob simulator that you might have seen go viral on Twitter a few weeks ago to figure out exactly how blobs react to supply and demand, and are they actually good for Ethereum?
And I'm Ansgar Dietrichs. I'm a researcher at the Ethereum Foundation. I'm very opinionated on this question because I'm one of the co-inventors of blobs, one of the co-authors of proto-dunk sharding, and now I'm also working, among other things, on PIADAS, which is our next step in scaling the blob throughput.
Great, thank you guys. So the main question I see, or I think a lot of the ecosystem sees when they go on Twitter, go elsewhere about blobs is, should they be paying more to the network? This fee value accrual to the network has traditionally been, pretty much zero. Lately, over the last couple of weeks, we're at blob saturation, so we actually are generating fees from it. But I know each of you has a different opinion on this, and I want to start with Brad because you've been very opinionated about this on Twitter. So do you think that blobs should be free as a loss leader for the Ethereum network, or do you think that we should be charging more for them regardless of saturation?
Yeah, okay, so my journey through discovering and watching blobs has been evolutionary. I started initially on the ultrasound money. I come from the school of Bankless. So that's when I started watching stuff, right, that popularized through there. I saw blobs come live, fees go down, what the hell is going on with Ethereum? And then why is it happening? What's the future look like? All of that. So starting there, looking directly at fee and value accrual by the way of burning Ethereum, making it inflationary, and then seeing how it progressed to, okay, I have to accept Ethereum as money, which I do now believe is the ultimate value prop for the ecosystem. I have gone from, oh my God, this thing is never going to be value accretive in a burn perspective, to, okay, it does not matter, we need it for memetics and ETH is money, it's good as a loss leader. It's good psychologically to see L2s using this thing. We will debate about security properties and what that comes with, but I think ultimately loss leader is the way forward.
Yeah, so I like to answer these questions with data, and it was Bread Guy's threads that actually inspired me to create the Ethereum blob simulator, because a lot of people had opinions on, well, will Ethereum ever be profitable again? Will we ever burn ETH again? And I thought, well, obviously we will, but at what point will that happen? How much will transactions cost? Things like that. And so I put together the simulator, and you can kind of see using it that currently, if we try and charge for blobs, the fees on L2s go up quite dramatically, and that is a pretty bad idea. We don't want to encourage them to move to other sources of data availability. But long term, when a few years, maybe even a decade from now, when Ethereum has hundreds of rollups doing tens of thousands of transactions, it is actually possible to have blobs both keeping fees cheap and burning ETH. And so I do believe we should be a loss leader for now. I think we should build up a bigger ecosystem. I think that's much more important than trying to extract any kind of money now. But I wanted to give the bull case that long term, it's going to be okay.
Right. Yeah, and my perspective on that is that, I think given that R1 has been so congested for normal transactions for such a long time, we've kind of lost track of the fact that, in a way, the fact that we're even burning anything at all with 5059 is more a result of the embarrassment of basically just not having enough space for all transactions. Now, I'm saying that, but like it's not because we're doing a bad job or anything. I think fundamentally there's not enough throughput on a single chain to process 7 billion users worth of transactions in the entire world. So inevitably there will be congestion on the most popular L1. And you basically pricing is the fairest mechanism of allocating that to the people that have the highest payment willingness. So basically, you get some inflow of transaction fees that way, and burning them makes a lot of sense there. But it's not because we designed the chain to generate revenue. It's really just out of this embarrassment of basically just not having enough room for everyone. And actually, I don't know how many of you all were, maybe actually, out of curiosity, raise of hand, who of you all sent a transaction on Ethereum before 2017? Wow, that's a lot of people. I really expected like 4 hands, and it's like 50 hands. That's impressive. But you might remember, like before the first bubbles, like it really was basically free to use L1, and we're in the same phase with blobs now. Now our goal is to scale as hard as possible on the blobs, and I think we have a pretty good roadmap there. But inevitably, the same thing will happen, right? Like we will not scale infinitely. And demand will go infinite, right? And so like at some point we will find some point where basically like unfortunately again there will be some congestion fees. Hopefully if you amortize that on a per L2 user basis, it will be very cheap, but there won't be a way around that. But very specifically, Ethereum is not a platform that specifically tries to like use its monopoly position to extract more value than is necessary for the congestion.
Yeah, I think that's an important point with how I mentioned the loss leader, and you guys hit on this as well, is that we need to keep people in the Ethereum ecosystem. We want to keep them in the Ethereum ecosystem, and we want them using Ethereum. And without blobs, I think that Ethereum would be in a much worse position, just personally, and I think that's pretty agreeable regardless of what you think about their value accrual properties and things like that. But blobs aren't the only DA layer, I guess you could say, in the ecosystem. There is Celestia, EigenDA, Avail, a bunch of others out there. There's even data availability committees that people just spin up with a bunch of other people and put your DA there. So I think one thing that confuses a lot of people is why would people use, or why would the rollups and layer 2s use Ethereum DA over one of these other DA layers? Because the switch isn't simple. Like if Base or someone else or Arbitrum wanted to switch to another DA layer, they technically could, and the users wouldn't really feel it, right? Maybe they'd feel the potentially cheaper fees, but it would be the same experience to them. But why are they still using blobs? Why are they still committed to using Ethereum blobs even when they've started going up in price?
So to establish my position, and I think actually why a lot of my posts started gaining prominence, I am the chief fedor of Ethereum blobs. I do not believe ETH deserves a premium. It deserves a premium. I do not think teams will respect that premium on a long enough time horizon. And why I believe that is because a lot of the short-term incentives to switch from Ethereum blobs to EigenDA, Celestia, Avail is the users themselves do not understand. Like the big thing is like, oh, I've seen like Torgel. I fight him on Twitter pretty consistently. He goes, all the TVL is on rollups that use Ethereum DA, and I go, bro, no one knows what the hell DA even does for them as a user, and that's all downstream from a multi-sig that can snipe the stuff out the back door. So like to justify that like people are making decisions right now based on DA when to the user, you'd called it out a little bit, to use an alternative DA layer, well, the teams that are businesses can lower their costs as a business, right? It goes from tens of thousands of dollars down to potentially, hundreds of dollars, and the end users to get a cheaper median fee. So like both of those incentives to me tell me that on a long enough time horizon, the users will complain, and we talk about capacity. Ethereum blobs will not be able to scale to the capacity of some of these chains. I'm working for Mega ETH, right? Like we straight up could not even use Ethereum DA because it doesn't hit the capacity that we're aiming for. So like not even an option. And we're starting to see Base. Base is approaching the limit of what they're doing. They're projecting like we want to scale 1 megagas per week. Sometimes we'll go a little higher. Jesse is on Twitter pleading like, please scale blob space, because if you don't scale blob space, we're at a point where we're paying more and our user median fee is going up, right? Like, and we can no longer onboard the world. Everyone can't come on chain. So I think like natural incentives is pushing people to alternative DA layers. And even though it may be better on a long time horizon to use Ethereum, better security, better whatever, the short-term feedback loop is like, it's incentives to push people to alternative layers.
Yeah, so in the short term, I mostly agree with that assessment that like when layer 2s are only at stage 1 or stage 0 and they have multi-sigs, like it doesn't, on all the risks of ways you're going to lose your money, like having an alternative DA layer is very, very low on that list. The main reason I think blobs make sense the long term is because you can have, when you have full stage 2 ZK rollups, these can be completely proven and secure by Ethereum with no external dependencies in that like when you want to update the state of this rollup, you have the blob data, you have the proof, and you have the state. They're all held by the Ethereum validator. There's no one else giving some external data. There's no Oracle. There's no possibility of an Oracle attack or any kind of external DA attack. If we want to be running the global financial system in the future and having billions or hundreds of billions of dollars on layer 2s, a lot of these institutions or people building large financial products do not often don't want to make that trade-off of security, of having external dependencies for a small saving. But this also depends on how much blobs end up costing. If Ethereum doesn't actually increase the blob limit and it costs a ton of money to use Ethereum, there is going to be very few people using DA layers. So we do have to scale to that point and be somewhat cost competitive. And I actually think of it similar to like a content delivery network or say S3 in the Web 2 world, in that there are cheaper CDNs than like CloudFront, and there are cheaper ways to store files in S3, but a lot of people still use them because they are kind of linked to what they are. So there's the security trade-offs, and it's also like the amount of effort it takes to switch off. If you're only saving a tiny bit of money, who cares? If it's costing your users a lot, then like Base is now complaining that they're obviously very incentivized to start using an alternative DA layer.
Yeah, I think actually it's like a really, really interesting question, right? Like how the end game for DA will look like. There's a lot of people right now exploring how it could look like even. And the reason why Ethereum even offers DA at all, right? Like a lot of people ask this question, was it a good idea to even start? Like initially we didn't have a DA service, and then we created blobs, and the question is, why did we do that? And it was specifically not because it was like, oh, that's an exciting new market, we can generate some extra revenue, but it was specifically like a consequence of the rollup-centric roadmap, right? Like we initially had this like different plan with the sharded execution, and then it turned out, no, actually doing that in a distributed way with rollup exploring on their own makes a lot more sense. And then the question was, what do they need? They don't need the distributed, the sharded execution, but they do need the data. And so that's why we kind of decided to build this data availability product. And fundamentally, like indeed, like what is the difference? Like for the end user, what is the difference whether your DA is on Ethereum, where it's possibly at least reasonably expensive, or it's on Celestia, or maybe even it's just some, you put it, you publish it on AWS or somewhere, like you just push it somewhere and say, hey, it's available. Don't you see it? And it is a good question, right? Like what actually is the long term, like how far can we even scale? I think no matter how much we scale, there will always be a premium for like the Ethereum DA, just because having security and settlement, like DA security and settlement in one hand, is the most secure way to go. But of course, if we have low throughput, that means that will only ever be useful for like some special purpose L2s, where maybe, I don't know, if you for your real estate transactions, like you have a real estate registry and you only send one transaction every 10 years and that uses your like on-chain DA. Maybe, that's a world where we have low throughput, very expensive DA. If we can push to literally infinite throughput, then everything will use Ethereum DA. That's probably not possible in a fully decentralized way. So we're probably going to go for some sort of middle ground, right? Where like, and the question then is, what does that mean? Does it mean that a network like Base, because that example was given, will still use on-chain DA? I would assume yes. I think we can scale to that level. Will Mega ETH be able to use on-chain DA? Hopefully, less clear. Hopefully. Will like a gaming L2 be able to use on-chain DA? My assumption is probably not. Like not a one DA, right? Like they'll probably use some cheaper alternative, and that is going to be an interesting security trade-off. One last thing I would want to mention there is this interesting wrinkle that we are moving into a ZK world, right? So most L2s will over time turn ZK, and in ZK you have this interesting design space that in principle you can have multiple sources of DA for a single L2. That's in principle not possible for an optimistic rollup, because if you basically can mint infinite ETH somewhere in the system, you can basically flood the entire system with it. But with ZK, because it ensures integrity, even if you can't see the data, you can use multiple sources of DA, and then you have like some subset of the L2 where basically you can in principle grieve the people there and just not reveal what the current state of the system is, but you can never steal from them. And so in principle, maybe the long-term endgame could look like some L2s basically only have a maximum security range of addresses that uses on-chain DA, and then like basically free everywhere else. But yeah, like again, it's a really interesting design space, and all we can do from our side is just scale as much as we can, and then let the ecosystem explore.
Yeah, I think it's interesting hearing all the different perspectives here, because as you can see, the common theme of the panel today is that there are a lot of open questions to these things, and we're working through them as an ecosystem. And I think we're all aligned on thinking that, blobs, I mean, so far are good, are like a net positive for Ethereum, but there is competition out there, there are trade-offs, and at the end of the day, what users care about over anything is cheap fees, fast transactions, right? And if the creators of these layer 2s, their ecosystems, if the fees start going up because blobs aren't meeting that demand, then we do risk losing these layer 2s and rollups to the other deliverability layers. But that probably segues nicely into ETH value accrual when it comes to blobs, because as Brett mentioned just before, he's become a bit of an ETH is money advocate lately. I think the longer that you spend in Ethereum, you're probably more likely to become this advocate, just because I think you come to the conclusion that a lot of the value accrual from fees and MEV and stuff like that tends to get captured by the people generating it, or by like the apps generating it, rather than it being bled to the L1. And I think on a long enough time frame, this happens to every L1 personally. But I'd like to get each of your thoughts on, if ETH needs to keep scaling up blobs and needs to keep them basically dirt cheap. I know that, Tim, you made a simulator for this, but do you ever imagine blobs being like a huge value accrual driver for ETH, or do you think it's complementary in that it allows us to scale up ETH as money through these different layer 2s?
I think most value is going to come through memetics of it occasionally cresting this level of it being, like the progression is going to be hit limit, sit at limit for a little while, they're going to reach maximum efficiency to like compress as much value as they can, sub limit. It'll eventually spike over, we're going to have an airdrop or something that's going to make stuff go crazy. Memetics of that, burn's going to go crazy, it's all back on the menu, awesome, like whatever. And then ultimately these teams are going to go off. Like when I first started doing the research posts, I think I over-indexed myself. I was full on thinking like the lizard people are taking over, like they're immediately going to switch over and they're turning the frogs gay. Like I was Charlie Day doing crazy stuff and thinking L2s immediately the second it's not free, they're going to turn off and go where else. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to hit now that I'm taking a step back, it's going to hit this limit. They will burn a considerable amount of ETH because the pricing does ramp up very quickly. That's going to happen. We'll start seeing some weird stuff, right? They'll start adjusting. They'll start like not posting. People will start asking questions. It'll bring some memetics back to the actual conversation. That'll accrue value just as mind space. But ultimately, I still think teams will act in self-interest because it is advantageous, frankly, to do so for users, for them. Like there's too many natural market incentives to move away from ETH DA. Once it reaches the point of consistent plus saturation, that they'll migrate off to an alt DA. And then you have to go back to the process again. Base is gone, right? They eat like 40% of blob space. They roll off because they made the decision it's better for them as a business, fair. Then more people come in, ETH is premium, ETH is whatever, maximally aligned, fills back up, spikes over, the leader transitions off to another one, and we constantly have this oscillation of like, comes back into vogue, goes away, comes back into vogue, goes away, burns a shit ton of ETH, goes away, yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, that we'll have these waves of burn and basically free blobs as we keep scaling. I always liked David Hoffman's 2009 post about Ethereum being a triple point asset, in that it has both interest bearing, it's a store of value, and it is used as a money. And if we do not have any burn, then it loses that leg of that, which is okay. But like long term, I would like to see it basically be that triple point asset. But I do think we'll go through these cycles of burning and not. And as long as we don't try and rent seek basically, or like extract value from L2s and charge them too much, I think that'll be fine. And like, users will, when they're already starting to use apps and using a chain, they're not going to go away because the fees went from like 2 cents to 10 cents. Because like we saw people use Ethereum and pay $50 for transfers a few years ago, and even now with things going back to 10 cents, people are still using the chains, so it's not too big of a deal. But when it's a year straight of high fees, that will be very bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, right? Because like this is where the debate touches on the question of what even gives ETH value, and do we want to maximize fee accrual? And I think that's very much an open question. Like I have opinions, but I think it's just because this entire space of blockchains, of crypto assets is still so new, and we just do not have a very good understanding of how these systems actually behave. I think really we have to plan for all scenarios. Like I'm an ultrasound money guy. I think ultimately the monetary premium is all that matters, and I don't think the fee capture is important. But at the same time, that could be wrong. Like I think it would be completely insane to have high confidence on this, right? Like you have to be open to the possibility of that's wrong, and that actually you need the fee accrual. And why do we care? Well, we care because ETH needs to have some minimum amount of value that staking is safe, right? Like if basically we end up having zero fee accrual and that's what matters, and then ETH goes to zero, the system doesn't work, right? So we need to make sure ETH has some minimum amount of value, and that has to scale as the amount of economic activity on top scales. Like today's security level might not be good enough if the entire world economy runs on Ethereum, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but like it definitely can't, if it goes down by a factor of 100, now it's definitely not secure enough, right? So we need to make sure that ETH has some value. I think there's a good chance that monetary premium is what we need. If we need the fees, I think it is possible that like a couple of years from now, we might have to reassess. I think most likely, I talked about it earlier, right? Like there's fundamental kind of a limit of resources that you can have in a decentralized L1. So most likely congestion will just forever give us enough fee revenue, same on with blobs as well. Maybe at some point technology becomes so good, right? Like too cheap to meter that actually we will have to consider having value capture mechanisms beyond congestion. I don't think that should be on the table anytime soon though.
I think there's something important to be said about fee generation as a proxy for activity and demand versus fee generation to the point of ultrasound money, right? Like that's great for memetics, and I think the ecosystem does broadly look at fee generation. Because like look at Solana, right? Solana's generating a shit ton of fees now, relative, right, to what they were previously. And people see that and they go, oh, look, there's demand here. It's not doing it to the point of deflation of the asset, which like unlocks another memetic tier of whatever. But I think, so yes, fee generation is important memetically, like signaling, social, like pulling people together. So like, I think that is important. I don't think like, looking specifically at the ultrasound like level as like, look, now all of a sudden this thing is worthwhile is a thing to like hinge the entire Ethereum identity on.
Yeah, and I think you all made a lot of good points here, and you discussed blobs as if they exist in a vacuum, though. That's one thing I noticed, right? Because we don't just have blobs, we have the normal L1 fee market as well. And I think there is this obvious misconception in the ecosystem that the L1 isn't going to scale. It is, to a point, like not like these kind of mega chains out there, mega L1s, monolithic L1s, whatever you want to call them. That's not Ethereum's path, but the L1 will scale. But the L1, regardless of it scaling or not, is still generating fee revenue for ETH. And we've seen lately as the market heats up, activity heats up, it's starting to generate a lot of fee revenue again, and at times we are net deflationary. And that's the thing, you now have to add the normal L1 fee market as well as the blob fee market, and then you get the extra burn there. So I think that I like the oscillation thing where you'll have I guess bull and bear periods, and I think that's just true for pretty much every fee market within the ecosystem. But I think when you actually look at the longer path, like as was mentioned, and where the value will actually sit and who wants to capture the value, L1 tokens have a very difficult time capturing value from MEV and fee revenue versus capturing it from being a money and a store of value. And that's, I think, the path that we should be pushing on as an ecosystem, which I think we're all aligned on here. But fee revenue is still obviously critically important as well. Just shifting gears a little bit here to something with regards to interoperability. So that's been a huge topic of discussion within the Layer 2 ecosystem and within the Ethereum ecosystem more broadly because of the fact that right now Ethereum doesn't feel like a single unified Ethereum. It's a fragmented ecosystem, a lot of work being done to bring it all together. But there is one critical point here with blobs is that when you have everything unified under one umbrella, when you have the settlement and the data on the one chain here, interoperability becomes a lot more seamless, a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to reason about. And you can just basically say, well, I know how my data is secured, I know how long it's available for, I know where it is, I know my settlement guarantees. Whereas if you split that up, you now have to worry about two different things. So you have to basically say, well, my data is over here on Celestia. Is something going to happen to my layer 2 if something happens to Celestia? And then interoperability becomes harder because maybe the other players who are using ETH don't want to be interoperable with you or don't want to play friendly with you because they're like, well, you're not in our club, you're not in our cool kids club now. So I'm wondering, like, could that be a driver, the interoperability driver? Could that be a driver to keep these layer 2s on ETH, especially if they want to become things like based rollups?
No. No. All right. So this is where I tackle. Like, this is, I think, another reason a lot of this is an engineering problem to my perspective, right? So like, yes, okay, so security, yes, I get it, Ethereum security deserves a premium, awesome, cool. World War 97, doesn't matter, it's secured. I think because of the natural incentives, teams can resolve for that while maintaining costs by leveraging, like, I'll touch interop as well, like by building in redundancy, right? So like, oh, Ethereum is charging 20 times per kilobyte to charge a blob versus like, I could post that same shit over to EigenDA plus Avail plus Celestia simultaneously, and then like now I have that information built through redundancy. Like, what's the likelihood of Celestia going down? I don't know, probably pretty high relative to Ethereum. What's the likelihood that Celestia plus EigenDA plus whatever is down? Like, and then like you can build in some safety there where like you need an N of N like to pull the same data from all three, make sure it's the same, cool, it's good data, whatever. So like I feel like that's a potential outcome that teams can build for, and saves us money, awesome. Like as a business, that's great. And then same thing for interop. Like that, interop is the harder thing for me to attack, but I think ultimately long-term horizon, my own head, for where L2s resolve, I'm kind of stratifying, put it in a different stratospheres, right? There's going to be a totally abstracted layer for people who are not on-chain natives, not people in this room, right? Because we constantly want to be interacting with our chain directly with a wallet, whatever, the interop situation is always going to suck. Right? It's going to suck because we're so in tune with what's going on. And then there's going to be, like, so for us, there is no awesomeness. And, like, yes, interop is great, still annoying. I want the simplicity of a single state environment. So, like, that's why Solana is gaining a lot of traction right now. Because, like, I don't have to worry about shit. And I think that's going to ultimately happen at the L2 landscape, where these ultra high capacity L2s just provide simplicity through single state environments. And then you have the total other end of the spectrum with, like, based app chains because they have access to L1 state and composability. I think that's going to be a good selling point. Something like ENS chain. I think that should be a base chain. That'd be sweet. So I think like that's ultimately where it's going to go in that whole middle ground, whether it's interoperable or not. I think there's business incentives to like don't be interoperable. And I think, yes, like cool, you can do some interop because we should have a shared DA layer, but I also think it's an engineering problem to where like, what if you have a huge validator, right? You pimp this thing out and I have, like I'm running a sidecar for, like I have a full node, cool, running a sidecar for Celestia, I got Doom running in the back, I'm doing everything. This thing is sick. And now I can potentially have, it's an engineering problem, interop between Celestia, right? Celestia and Ethereum blobs. And so like long enough time horizon, why isn't that a possibility that people end up doing? So like how is that a premium for Ethereum in that world?
Interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit. In generally, you're right. So one of the big, for a lot of these interoperability solutions, you rely on third parties or you rely on solvers or someone to do things for you. And there are ways that rollups can basically interop with each other natively. So there's a rollup improvement proposal 7755, and that's where rollups can basically read what happened on other rollups based on the data posted to layer 1. And if there are a bunch of rollups that want to work together natively, you can basically move assets between using this system. If they're like stage 2 ZK rollups, they're basically as secure as Ethereum. when this happens, if you have, like, say, an ecosystem of a few rollups, they're all using, on Ethereum, they're all ZK rollups, they all use this to interop. Someone wants to join them and wants them to interop, but they're like, oh, actually, I'm using Celestia, I'm using some other DA solution. It kind of gives them pause, because then if that other rollup has some issue, it affects them as well. Like, it affects basically the assets that have been bridged across, or they don't know if they're doing some kind of, say, mint burn system with assets between these other rollups they're interoping with. You could have like a double spend problem, things like that. Like, this is very, very low risk, but it is a risk if it matters if you're moving millions or billions of dollars. Like, it doesn't really matter that much if you only have a few thousand, and yeah.
Yeah, it's great that we found a topic of disagreement. Yeah, because, so I'm with you. I think it's a bit tricky, right? Because you could, for example, ask the question, if you've been a user on one of those L2s that have been settling on L1 and also have been using L1 DA for a while, you're probably very familiar with paying high fees, right? You might have paid $1 in the past for the L2 transaction. I certainly have. And you might ask, well, what did you actually get for that, right? Like, you could have at the same time just went to one of the side chains. We have also many great side chains on Ethereum and paid sub-cent. And the question is, did you get anything that was worth $1 there? And that is a tricky question, because it's not obvious that you did. It's not obvious that you did, because oftentimes what we're doing in Ethereum, and it's an opinionated choice, is that we are designing for the eventual end state, and then we are basically willing to pay some extra cost to basically shoot directly for it and go for it as fast as possible. Because alternatively, you could imagine to say, well, you're on L2, for now it's a multi-sig anyway, might as well not use on-chain DA, might as well not do settlement, right? Like, let's bring this on later once we remove the multi-sig. But the problem is, and that's maybe where the dollar was worth it after all, right, is that if you do not build for the end game from the beginning, it's going to be very, very, very hard to later on course correct. We've seen this a lot with sidechains. There have been quite a few sidechains on Ethereum that have expressed the intention to eventually move to on-chain DA. None of them really have done that so far. One or two exceptions, I don't want to, but like by and large, they've not actually done that so far, because it turns out it's actually quite hard. And same thing with, like, you know, like the different stages for L2s that L2B tracks so well, and like actually, if you don't, for example, say a distributed sequencer set, right? If you don't actually build for robust sequencing from the very start, it turns out that even the easier version of that, which is just like a high throughput on-chain inbox queue, right? So for censorship resistance, even just building that becomes a huge challenge for you, because you just build the entire system with the assumption that you have one sequencer that is trusted, right? And so basically, at all steps of the way, if you build for what's expedient today, the price you pay is that you don't have, it's not clear that you have a path to where you want to go 3, 4, 5 years from now, right? And we're doing this at the L1 oftentimes, I think of any of the contentious topics on L1 over the last 2 or 3 years, it basically always was an example of people being like, why are you doing this thing that I don't like today? And then we are saying, well, because we want to be at this point in 5 years. And it is a trade-off, right? Like the fractured L2 ecosystem, right? Like, why did we do this? Well, we could have not gone with the rollup-centric roadmap, and maybe actually today we would be in a better position. But I promise you, 3, 4, 5 years from now, we will be in a better position with the path we took today, right? And so I think the same will basically be true with, sorry, this was a very long-winded answer to go back to blobs now, but basically the same is true in a way with blobs. I actually do not think that L1DA matters so much today, but at the same time, if you think that because of that you can make the choice of not using it, I think you really are making a very dangerous choice, because I think over time it will matter more and more and more and more. I think you did a great job explaining like these differences in terms of bridging, trustless bridging, especially once we go to ZK, and there's a lot of upside once it becomes the trust bottleneck, which today it just isn't, right? But once it becomes a trust bottleneck, it's going to be more and more important to be on the same DA network and to have that be the same network that you also settle on. And so the only way to guarantee you'll get there is by doing it today. So I don't know, this was maybe a bit of a weird answer, but I really think that's like a tension that's at the core of a lot of these like long-term decisions in the entire ecosystem.
I think this is a common theme within the Ethereum ecosystem that, yeah, a lot of people kind of, I guess, struggle to understand this path dependence that we talk about, right? Because Ethereum is such a large ecosystem, it's so decentralized, any decision that we make today does have a path dependence to it. And if it's not the right decision today, and then in 5 years we're like, oh, well, we're going to do something else now because we made the wrong decision.
Beam chain.
Yeah, it becomes a whole thing, right? As we've seen with Ethereum many times. So yeah, and we don't know, right? As Ansgar, I think you mentioned earlier, we don't know what the right decision is. We're making bets. We don't have the 100% right answer, but we're just trying to research the right answer, then do some implementations, do some experimentation around it. And if we have to change paths, do it quickly, right? Because if we don't, there's that path dependence, network effects get built, and then we're stuck. And this is across all of Ethereum. It happens across all of Ethereum. Now, maybe the last question, which I think is going to be another big question that a lot of people ask is, okay, we have blobs, L2s are scaling, it's all well and good. We've got a high priority placed on blobs as part of like upgrading them with increasing their accounts and their targets and maxes, and also PIADAS is a huge upgrade for it. But should we also be scaling L1 execution? That's a huge question. And there is debate about how much we should scale it versus how much we should be scaling blobs. I would love to get each of your opinions on the priority of scaling L1 execution versus blobs. Do you think blobs should remain the first priority and we'll do L1 execution slowly over time? Or do you think more emphasis and more priority should be put on L1 execution scaling?
I like John Charbonneau's position of like L1 execution scaling is not isolated or separate from scale L2s, right? There are, like you look at the Eclipse team, you look at like a lot of these teams talk about what we need with L1 execution in order to increase our performance, single slot finality, the interoperability we've been alluding to with shared blobs also comes from increased execution. I also think there's a little bit of memetics that's of using ETH directly. I think the moneyness of ETH kind of fades the further away you get from main chain. Like it still exists because you have a lot of L2s, but those L2s have optionality, right? They can switch from the gas token to whatever, and then like you have abstraction on top of that, it's whatever. So I think ETH should continue. I think ultimately the way value accrues in a modular ecosystem is you have to continue to force or scale your execution environment, your state, to be the hot state up to your level of comfort with like preserving the properties that you want. Obviously decentralization is a huge thing that Ethereum prioritizes. That's great. Have that discussion. I don't think you should stop that too soon, and you should attract a subset of use cases to be preserved directly from on-chain users on your chain. We talk about high-value DeFi stuff. He's talking about billions of dollars moving around. Like you want like tokenization of treasuries. Like you want that on Ethereum. Like you want some of that. So I think Ethereum should continue to do this stuff, and by bringing value to your state specifically, whether or not it's made for an L2 specifically, will make those other L2s want to tie into Ethereum and will maintain them wanting to tie to your network. Because if Ethereum doesn't feel like it's valuable state, and for whatever reason, on-chain users, whatever, continue to migrate to Solana, and Solana becomes the like their TVL moves over there, then ultimately they start to get on par with Ethereum. Well, the L2 can kind of switch over, and then like they want to be attached to the best settlement layer. I know John will kill me for saying settlement layer, but like yeah, I think the priority should be on L1 execution, and L1 execution is not independent of scaling roadmap through L2s.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's very important also for if a L2 goes down and you want to get funds out of there, or if L2 starts censoring and you want to push transactions through, currently you use L1 for that. And if we don't scale it, then that gets very expensive. We had a time when the Arbitrum sequencer went down for a few hours and L1 was just clogged with transactions of people trying to push things through. So we do need to scale there. The problem is that like we can only really scale like 10x, maybe more if we ZKify everything. So it's not a good long-term plan if we want to actually stay decentralized and have home stakers. And so scale it a bit, but long-term blobs are where most transactions, L2s are where most transactions are going to happen.
Yeah, and to basically double click on that a little bit, I think one thing that not always is quite as focused on in this discussion of like, Ethereum versus Solana. And actually, I like Solana, this is not supposed to fade them or anything, but like, you can't just take the L1 and scale it to infinite users. Maybe barring some very fancy long-term ZK technology, but like specifically because of the fact that you want everyone to completely trustlessly be able to verify the current state of the world chain, right? And so for that, you basically just have to make a choice, like what is the minimum requirements of a full node. And the nice thing that you then get with the rollup-centric roadmap is with this, I would say I call it the execution compression trick of basically the L2 being able to, they're able to run it like, in principle, a single L2 could run it like gigagas or like even, I don't know, teragas or something, and then you compress that all down into like a very tiny, easy to execute proof on the L1, and then you get the best of both worlds. You get like super high throughput, but then still the ability to verify with very little compute. And so fundamentally there's a limit to how much the L1 can scale. Now, we are not at that limit. So this is not supposed to be like an easy out here. Actually, I will say my personal opinion is that we deprioritized L1 scaling a little bit too much over the last 2-3 years. I think that has good reasons. We like first the merge, and then there was a lot of like merge cleanup, and then also like it was just not so clear with the rollup-centric roadmap what exactly the L1 is supposed to provide to the L2s. So I think we now starting to have a pretty good picture. So I think now it's about time to like commit and really build the L1 into the best L1 it can be for this world that we are starting to see more clearly. But there are also real trade-offs. So my point that I would make is we should not just scale in a dumb way, because again, we're always trying to shoot for 5 years in the future. If we just grow the state, I think we've seen some other early clones of the Ethereum chain that just ran recklessly with state growth, and then they struggled a lot because of it. We should not make the same mistake. We should take the 5-year outcome into account. There are good ways to scale. I would call it basically scale smart, not just by brute force. I don't think the gas limit is the right mechanism. I think we have a lot of things now in the pipeline that can actually give us a lot of extra throughput. There is compute repricing. Like, compute is just too expensive on Ethereum. There's no reason for it. We have the throughput. Like, we can just literally make all compute 5 times cheaper on Ethereum today, and it would not be an issue. Like, we should just do that. I mean, there's some nuances. It's not like a one-line change, but we can do that. Storage. We should be better at pricing exactly the right behavior that we want. For example, if the same state is used multiple times throughout the block, that should be cheaper, because that is actually cheaper for the node that executes it. A lot of these kind of like smart ways to scale, we are working on statelessness, right? Statelessness is this big thing that I don't think, to my knowledge, like very few ecosystems right now do that, very few chains do that, which would be a huge unlock, because then the people that want to verify this global chain trustlessly do not have to have that state that keeps growing. So that would allow us to potentially, there are many other bottlenecks then, but potentially scale state access, state growth by a big factor as well. So my message would be, yes, we should scale the L1, but please do it in a smart way. Don't just run with the gas limit.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all in agreement that we should scale both the L1s and the L2s, but it's, there's that tension about what priorities we should do and how long it's going to take, and not to sacrifice certain parts of the ecosystem that always exists. So we've got a couple of minutes left here. I just wanted to quickly give Tim a chance to talk about his blob simulator tool that he built, because this is a really good tool, because we talk a lot about blobs, but you finally put some data to it, and you gave people a tool to be able to actually simulate what it looks like in the future as we scale blobs up, as more rollups come online. So I just wanted to give you a second to be able to shill, if you will, what you built.
Thank you. So I love bringing data to these debates. I don't like it when people just argue with hypotheticals. So I created this blob simulator. It's open source on GitHub, MIT licensed. I'd love for people to create reports with it, play around, report any bugs, maybe add things like how much execution gas will be used by rollups, things like that would be awesome. If you have any ideas on like more data that you would like to see that you could bring to the argument, create an issue on the GitHub as well, or reach out to me on Twitter, and we can try and get that in there so we can actually have an idea of how things will look a decade in the future and figure out where we're going.
Can I make a feature request for a toggle where just like at this point the L2 fucks off and uses a different data layer? I went with that.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Well, this has been great. Thank you very much to all the panelists for joining me today. One actually last thing I should do, because, I don't know, it feels like we're all kind of a bit too bullish right now. We need to be a little bit more bearish. I think I'd love just a quick rapid fire from each of you, your most kind of like bearish case for Ethereum blobs. Like, what does the future look like if Ethereum blobs kind of failed?
Honestly, so the reason I think I've ultimately embraced the ETH is money meme is because once you've accepted that world, you realize it does not really matter, right? Like, it's available to whatever, as long as Ethereum can prove itself to be available. Whether or not teams use blobs, like, yeah, it kind of matters, but I don't think ultimately it matters on the surface, and you ultimately just want these L2s, whether it's just posting like proofs, or if they're doing proofs plus DA plus whatever, you just want money in the hands of people and for them to denominate their assets in that. So therefore you want to export it. Does not really matter if they use blobs a ton. We're going to bicker about it because we're nerds and that's what we do, but like for the scale that we want Ethereum to be, it does not matter long term, frankly.
Yeah, the most bearish case would be if we try and rent seek or try and make as much money as possible now and think really short term and don't increase the blob count. That would be a terrible idea, I think.
Yeah, I mean, from the inside, I would say I don't think there's a big risk that we'll do it for rent-seeking purposes, but I do think we could do it by not realizing how much of a priority it needs to be, because it is a real engineering challenge to scale blobs. There is work ongoing. I'm very optimistic that it will get us far, but it requires continuous attention and focus. And so the failure case, I think, would be that if over time the ecosystem loses track of that focus and we ship very lackluster throughput increases, and over time that's just not enough for L2s, and they are forced to leave, and I don't think anyone could blame them, and basically we end up in just a world that overall is worse for users because they have less security.
Yeah, great. So let's keep scaling blobs. Let's make sure we don't rent seek, and let's make ETH money. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Let's give our panelists and moderator a big round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Now let's go straight to our Q&A. We've got lots of questions coming in. Now, we do have a lot of questions, and if it's okay with the gentlemen on stage, just share the questions among yourselves, and let's keep the answers short, sweet, simple, and straight to the point. Okay, first question up on the screen. Blobs are great, and so is proto-dank sharding. When dank sharding? Question mark.
Yeah, I guess I'll take the roadmap questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, I think dank sharding was the initial way we described the end game for like where we want to go. Then we realized that the best way to get there is actually iteratively. So we will launch what's called PIADAS in one of the next two upcoming hard forks on Ethereum. And then that approach will probably iteratively get us more and more towards dank sharding. I'm not sure we will ever have a hard fork that then is dank sharding. I think instead your mental model should be Ethereum will keep scaling the A throughput every hard fork. I'm trying to establish the meme 3x throughput increase every year for the next couple of years.
All right, thank you for the answer. Great question as well. With 6 votes, we have another question. Do you guys think that additional things like blobs will make it harder for everyday people to run nodes from home? What do you think about that?
So the meme answer is no, because no one are going to use these things. Like, no one's going to post data to them, so you don't have to download shit, so you're fine. It's good. No.
Short, sweet, you want to add something to that? Go ahead.
It will make it harder, and we have to be very mindful about that, but hopefully we have good solutions.
All right, great discussion. Okay, let's move on to the next question as well. With 4 votes, if blob-based fees go up on Ethereum, is it viable for L2s to batch and post non-urgent transaction blobs separately, optimally whenever the blob-based fees go low?
I actually know of a protocol that's actually specialized in this, specifically working with L2 teams so that they can smart post all of their data. And because that doesn't immediately impact users, teams are opting to use it, right? They're saying like, oh, we'll delay this batch because like, oh, it's a little hot right now, or could get a little hot, and then we're going to post it a little bit later. And that's ultimately what's building into my bear case of this stuff, is that like L2 teams are like, some are showing to really care, and they're like, F you, we're using ETH is money, cool. Other teams are saying like, yeah, cool, we'll hang out for a little bit, or like your Scroll, and Scroll just said like, we're not going to post because it's hot right now. So like, sorry guys, you won't know because you're end users, but we'll continue to do our thing.
But at the same time, they can't wait forever. Like if you're in 2021 and you're waiting for gas to go down to 10 Gwei, you're waiting for a year. Yeah. And they have to be secured by Ethereum at some point.
Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Let's move on. We've got a lot of questions. Let's see how many we can get through. What are your thoughts on Eclipse or other execution engines settling on Ethereum? Doesn't this solve a lot of Ethereum's scaling issues?
Yeah, I mean, they don't use Ethereum blobs. So like, yes, they do settle there. And I do, like, if you believe ETH is money in these environments, Eclipse, Mega ETH, like if you believe that in these environments they're going to use Ethereum in the hands of users as gas, as denomination of assets, of all that stuff, then like solving the issues for scaling is like, how do you make value go to my token? Like my bags are going down, I want my bags to go up. How does value accrue? Like the next tier of ETH making new highs is people perceiving it as money and wanting to have access to cool shit and needing ETH in their pockets to do that cool stuff. And yes, Eclipse is doing that, Mega ETH will be doing that, like Base is doing that, right? They're making people need ETH to do the thing. And like that's, you just need more and more of that. It actually does not matter about fees directly.
But also at the same time, I will say I do like that we're seeing a lot of experimentation with different execution systems, like SVM-based ones. I don't think the EVM is the bottleneck in terms of throughput. I think you can also scale the EVM quite far. But I actually am very curious to see, you know, once we get to the efficient frontier of very high throughput L2s, which system actually wins out.
Is ETH money? A very good question to ask. Audience, is ETH money? Yes, thank you. Well, I'd like to hope all of you are internally agreeing. Thank you very much, because you got to build stuff to make ETH needed. All right. Builders may avoid including blobs due to the higher latency they cause. Do we have a mechanism to incentivize them?
We do today, and it's the tip. So the one thing we don't really have today is that, because for simplicity reasons, we didn't give the blobs a separate tip, so it's just the normal transaction tip, which is a little bit annoying because it doesn't scale with the amount of blobs, but so you have to like have some extra logic around that. Right now, I don't think clients for home builders expose that, and I think that would be a very easy fix, right? So basically give home builders the ability to specifically set a minimum tip below which they just don't include blobs, and I think that would actually be the market-driven solution because it causes extra effort, so you might as well get extra minimum payment, otherwise you just don't include them.
Very good. Anyone else want to add? No? All good? I would also appreciate tips. Thank you very much. You can put in my hair. I appreciate it. Anyway, let's go to a few more questions. We got about 3.5 minutes on the clock. Are home stakers the bottleneck to L1 scaling? What do you guys think?
Yes.
Yes, and that's a good thing. I mean, like,
Yes.
Well, that's that question answered. Well done. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, but no, that doesn't, I mean, it's great that we have them. Like they're a good bottleneck to have. So that's specifically the bottleneck that we need to basically work around and make sure that we will forever scale within the envelope that makes it possible. Not, by the way, stakers. I think people always focus too much on stakers and don't focus enough on full node runners other than stakers.
Yes.
In my vision for the long term, everyone runs a full node, or at least something close to a full node, even on their phones. And so in the long run, it must be easier, not harder, to run a full node for Ethereum.
Good point. Everyone in the future should be able to run a full node. I think that's the pathway and the right way. Sorry, you wanted to add something?
They are not a blocker for L2 scaling though. With 2D PDAS, with blobs, basically blobs are sharded amongst all the stakers, and so if we have 10,000 nodes, that's the blobs can be sharded across a lot of them. So even if we have 128 blobs per block, you're not downloading 128 blobs every block. You're downloading like a handful of blobs, and everyone's downloading a handful, and you're checking each other. And so we can scale L2s and blobs with home stakers.
Excellent, thank you. We've got 2.5 minutes, let's keep going. Does blobs, excuse me, it moved up. Where can I find blobs? Who's indexing all this data?
Yeah, so this is great. Actually, so as people know, blobs is actually, they can be pruned from full nodes, so after a certain period, no one has to keep them. But there are several ecosystem participants that have committed to long-term indexing of all this information, archival stuff. So like you have blobscan, which is a separate scanner just for that. You have Dune, you have Etherscan. All of these people are preserving this data. So yes, it will, home stakers, I know you've already publicly committed to like storing all of this information. So there's multiple places. I think I actually have a repository where all that can be seen. I'll actually make that public if people are interested. But it's blobscan is the primary place for me.
All right, blobscan, very good. Do blobs help solo stakers save hard disk drive space?
Yes and no. On one hand, it's just another thing that adds extra storage requirements, but it does take a lot of pressure off of call data, which call data you have to store forever because it's part of the history. We are going to change that in the future. It's called ERP 4444. But for now, you have to store history forever, whereas blobs you can throw away relatively soon. That's by design. I think part of it is just call data is just too cheap today. We're going to make it more expensive, but in the past we couldn't make it more expensive because we didn't have alternative ways to use DA. Now we have them. So overall, the load based from history on stakers will go down.
All right, we got a question about DA since you mentioned it. DA is a commodity. What characteristics can be added to ETH DA that make it special in some way?
It's not special.
I'm just keeping it cheap, and then because it's on Ethereum, you don't have any external dependencies. That makes it special.
Yeah, I think keep them cheap for now, and over time it will be more and more important that you actually use L1DA. In the meantime, maybe we can mint NFTs for the people. I don't know.
All right, I think we got 3 seconds. Let's see if we can fit one last question, the biggest and the longest question. How's BG feeling about Blob's Bird Eat doing 25 million a year run rate in the past 24 hours? More generally, which kinds of L2s will be willing to pay how much for Blobs before migrating to Alt-DA to save? I wish I understood the question. But I'm sure you guys do. So
Maximally aligned L2s, right? Like it's the people that fear the repercussions from the social layer are the ones that are going to stay there.
That's a good question, and it would be good to find that out and add that to the simulator of when they would leave, at what price.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've just finished our Q&A time. Let's give the gentlemen a big, big round of applause for the amazing session. Thank you, guys. We welcome you down from the stage. Really appreciate your time. All right. That was quite